Corporate executive Victoria Blackwell arrived at the exclusive penthouse medical suite atop Manhattan Memorial Hospital, expecting her usual VIP treatment during her routine procedure. Her personal assistant, Sarah Martinez, had been handling arrangements when Victoria's demands became increasingly unreasonable. "I don't pay you to think, Sarah. I pay you to execute my instructions perfectly and immediately," Victoria snapped while reviewing emails. "Clearly, you're not understanding the level of excellence required in my organization." Sarah maintained her professional composure despite the escalating verbal abuse. "Ms. Blackwell, I've arranged everything according to your specifications. Is there anything specific you'd like me to adjust?" Victoria's eyes flashed with irritation at what she perceived as insubordination. "Don't question my assessment of your performance. I've built a $50 billion empire by demanding perfection from people who work for me." What Victoria didn't know was that Sarah Martinez held dual degrees from MIT and Wharton, spoke 5 languages fluently, and had deliberately taken this position to gather evidence of workplace harassment, while the hospital's advanced security system recorded every word of abuse that would soon expose Victoria's toxic leadership to the world. If this story resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. The penthouse medical suite at Manhattan Memorial Hospital represented the absolute pinnacle of luxury healthcare, occupying the entire top floor of the prestigious medical center with amenities that rivaled presidential suites and royal accommodations worldwide. The 8,000-square-foot space featured panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows offering 360-degree views of Manhattan, imported Italian marble from Carrara quarries, hand-blown Venetian glass chandeliers worth millions of dollars, private helicopter landing pad for emergency transport, conference facilities with military-grade encryption, and accommodations that catered exclusively to world leaders, entertainment royalty, and business moguls who demanded absolute control. Over their medical experience and surrounding environment, Victoria Blackwell had reserved the exclusive penthouse for what she claimed was routine cardiac monitoring and stress management following exhaustion from managing her global business empire, though hospital staff suspected her extended stay was primarily motivated by the luxury accommodations and the opportunity to conduct high-stakes business negotiations from the most prestigious medical address in the world. At 52 years old, Victoria controlled Blackwell Global Enterprises, a diversified conglomerate worth over $50 billion, with subsidiaries spanning technology, pharmaceuticals, aerospace, defense contracting, and renewable energy that employed over 800,000 people across 7 continents, while generating enormous profits through aggressive business practices that prioritized shareholder value over employee welfare and social responsibility. The penthouse suite itself had been designed by the same architectural firm responsible for creating luxury residences for European royalty, Silicon Valley tech titans, and international heads of state who demanded perfection in every detail of their living environments. Every surface, fixture, and amenity had been meticulously selected to communicate unlimited wealth, technological sophistication, and absolute authority over the global business landscape that Victoria believed she was helping to shape and control through her various ventures and strategic investments. The main conference area featured a custom mahogany table, handcrafted from 1,000-year-old Brazilian rosewood, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than luxury automobiles, while advanced technology systems provided secure access to global financial markets, classified government communications, international banking networks, and private communication channels used exclusively by the world's most powerful business leaders and political figures. Victoria's daily routine in the hospital penthouse resembled the command center of a sovereign nation more than a medical facility designed for patient care and recovery. Her entourage included 15 personal assistants who managed different aspects of her global business empire, 25 security professionals who monitored both digital threats and physical safety across multiple time zones, 8 legal advisors who provided real-time consultation on complex international regulations and litigation strategies, 6 personal physicians recruited from exclusive private practices, and 4 communications directors who managed her public image across traditional media and social platforms worldwide. The technology infrastructure exceeded that of most government agencies and multinational corporations, featuring quantum-encrypted communication systems that prevented corporate espionage and unauthorized access to sensitive business information, artificial intelligence platforms that analyzed market trends and competitive intelligence across global markets in real time, satellite links to her corporate headquarters in New York, London, Tokyo, Dubai, Singapore, Mumbai, and Sao Paulo, and computational resources that could process more financial and strategic data per second than most national governments possessed or could afford to maintain. But beneath the veneer of technological innovation and luxury accommodation, Victoria had created an environment where she systematically abused, intimidated, and psychologically tortured anyone she perceived as subordinate or professionally irrelevant to her business objectives and personal vision for global economic dominance through corporate consolidation and market manipulation. Her treatment of employees, personal staff, and service providers reflected a worldview that divided humanity into rigid hierarchies of utility and competence, with most people classified as expendable resources whose emotional needs, professional dignity, and basic human rights were completely irrelevant compared to her profit maximization and wealth accumulation goals. Sarah Martinez represented everything that challenged Victoria's assumptions about intelligence, capability, and the relationship between job titles and actual qualifications. Though Victoria had never bothered to investigate the background of the personal assistant who had been working for her organization for 8 months while conducting what she privately considered corporate ethnography and workplace harassment documentation. At 31 years old, Sarah possessed educational credentials and professional experience that would have intimidated even someone as arrogant and demanding as Victoria Blackwell, though her current position as personal assistant concealed a background that included some of the most prestigious academic institutions in the United States and breakthrough research in artificial intelligence, organizational behavior, and corporate ethics that was influencing business school curricula and regulatory policy worldwide. Sarah's academic journey had begun with undergraduate studies at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where she had graduated summa cum laude with dual degrees in computer science and cognitive psychology, while conducting research that contributed to revolutionary developments in machine learning algorithms and human-computer interaction that were transforming industries from healthcare to financial services. Her exceptional academic performance and innovative research had earned her acceptance to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where she had completed her MBA with highest honors while specializing in organizational behavior and corporate strategy, focusing particularly on toxic leadership patterns and their impact on employee welfare, organizational performance, and long-term business sustainability. The Wharton experience had included consulting projects with Fortune 500 companies, where Sarah had observed corporate cultures, leadership styles, and management practices that ranged from inspiring and ethical to predatory and psychologically destructive, creating research interests that led to her doctoral studies in organizational psychology and business ethics. Her doctoral dissertation focused on documenting and analyzing toxic leadership behaviors in corporate environments, with particular emphasis on how extreme wealth and unchecked power created psychological conditions that enabled systematic employee abuse and organizational dysfunction that ultimately harmed business performance while causing immeasurable human suffering. But Sarah's decision to work as a personal assistant, rather than pursuing traditional consulting or academic careers, reflected her commitment to gathering first-hand evidence of workplace harassment and toxic leadership that could inform policy discussions, legal frameworks, and organizational interventions designed to protect vulnerable employees from executive abuse. Her position with Victoria Blackwell provided unprecedented access to observe authentic leadership behavior from someone whose wealth and power had eliminated most external constraints on her treatment of subordinates, creating opportunities to document patterns of abuse that were typically concealed from public scrutiny and regulatory oversight. The research methodology that Sarah employed involved systematic documentation of Victoria's interactions with employees, vendors, and service providers, while her advanced degrees in psychology and business provided frameworks for understanding the psychological mechanisms that enabled such destructive behavior and the organizational conditions that allowed it to persist without accountability. Sarah's work was supported by hidden recording equipment that captured audio and video evidence of Victoria's abusive behavior, creating comprehensive documentation that could be used for legal proceedings, regulatory investigations, and academic research about toxic leadership and its impact on workplace culture and employee welfare. The recording devices were state-of-the-art equipment designed for investigative journalism and academic research, featuring high-definition video capabilities, crystal-clear audio recording, and secure data storage systems that preserved evidence while protecting Sarah's identity and research objectives until she was ready to reveal her findings. Victoria's admission to the hospital penthouse represented the perfect environment for Sarah's research, as the medical setting would likely increase Victoria's stress levels while providing opportunities to observe her behavior toward healthcare workers and service providers who were legally protected from retaliation but often lacked the resources or support necessary to report executive abuse. The hospital's own security system provided additional documentation through comprehensive surveillance that monitored all interactions in patient areas, creating multiple sources of evidence that would corroborate Sarah's research findings while protecting healthcare workers from potential legal challenges or retaliation from wealthy patients. Dr. Michael Chen, Manhattan Memorial's chief medical officer, had been briefed about Victoria's demanding personality and history of difficult interactions with healthcare providers, though hospital administrators felt compelled to accommodate her requests due to the enormous revenue her extended stays generated for the medical facility. The medical staff had been instructed to provide exceptional care while maintaining professional boundaries. Though several nurses and physicians had already requested reassignment rather than deal with Victoria's abusive behavior and unreasonable demands that went far beyond appropriate patient care into personal service and ego gratification. When Sarah accompanied Victoria to the hospital penthouse, she was prepared to document the escalation of abusive behavior that typically occurred when Victoria felt stressed, vulnerable, or temporarily unable to maintain complete control over her environment and the people around her. The penthouse's luxury amenities and isolated environment created perfect conditions for Victoria to display authentic leadership behavior without the performance adjustments that might occur in more public settings where her reputation and business relationships could be affected by witnesses to her treatment of subordinates. As Victoria settled into her penthouse accommodations and began conducting business operations from the medical facility, Sarah positioned herself to observe and document interactions that would provide crucial evidence about toxic leadership and its impact on employee welfare and organizational culture. The first indication of Victoria's escalating behavior came during her initial meeting with hospital staff, where she immediately began establishing dominance relationships and testing the boundaries of what healthcare workers would tolerate from a wealthy patient who generated significant revenue for their institution. "I want everyone to understand that I operate on a completely different level from typical patients," Victoria announced to the assembled medical team. "My time is worth millions of dollars per hour, so any delays or inefficiencies will be treated as serious professional failures that affect your performance evaluations and employment prospects." The threatening tone was designed to intimidate healthcare workers while establishing her perceived superiority over medical professionals who were supposed to recognize their subordinate status and adjust their behavior accordingly to accommodate her demands and expectations. Sarah recognized Victoria's opening statements as classic examples of the intimidation tactics that characterized toxic leadership, using financial power and implied threats to create psychological pressure that would make employees more compliant with unreasonable demands and abusive treatment. As Victoria's stay in the hospital penthouse continued, her behavior towards Sarah and other staff members escalated from demanding leadership style to explicit psychological abuse that revealed the depth of her narcissism and complete disregard for human dignity or professional boundaries. "Sarah, I want you to understand something very clearly," Victoria announced during their first evening in the penthouse. "You exist to make my life easier and more efficient. Your opinions, feelings, and personal needs are completely irrelevant to me unless they somehow contribute to my business objectives or personal comfort." The dehumanizing statement was delivered with casual cruelty that demonstrated Victoria's fundamental inability to recognize other people as human beings, deserving of basic respect and consideration, viewing them instead as tools or resources to be used for her benefit without regard for their welfare or dignity. Sarah maintained her professional composure, while her recording devices captured every word of Victoria's abusive behavior, recognizing that she was documenting exactly the kind of toxic leadership that her research was designed to expose and analyze. But what neither Sarah nor Victoria realized was that the hospital's comprehensive security system was also recording their interactions, creating multiple sources of evidence that would soon expose Victoria's behavior to consequences she had never anticipated facing, despite decades of abusing employees and subordinates. As Victoria's stress levels increased from managing global business operations while confined to the hospital penthouse, her treatment of Sarah deteriorated from demanding leadership to systematic psychological torture that revealed the true extent of her narcissistic personality disorder and complete lack of empathy for other human beings. "I've been reviewing your performance over the past few months, Sarah, and I'm deeply disappointed in the quality of work you've been providing," Victoria announced while conducting a video conference with her board of directors who were witnessing her treatment of subordinate staff. "It's obvious that you lack the intellectual capacity and professional competence necessary for working at the executive level of a global corporation." The criticism was completely unfounded and designed purely to humiliate Sarah in front of business associates, while demonstrating Victoria's power over employees who were supposed to accept abuse without resistance or complaint that could affect their employment and financial security. Sarah recognized Victoria's behavior as textbook emotional abuse, using public humiliation and false criticism to undermine her confidence while asserting dominance through psychological manipulation that had no relationship to actual job performance or professional competence. Furthermore, Victoria continued while her board members observed the interaction through their video conference, "I think you need to understand that people in your position are easily replaceable. There are thousands of people who would be grateful for the opportunity to work for someone of my stature and accomplishment, so your job security depends entirely on my satisfaction with your attitude and performance." The implicit threat was designed to create fear and dependency, while reinforcing Victoria's perception of herself as superior to employees who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve her, regardless of how they were treated or what demands were made of them. Board member Dr. Patricia Williams, observing the interaction from London, felt increasingly uncomfortable with Victoria's treatment of her personal assistant, recognizing that such behavior created legal liability and reputational risks for the corporation, while potentially violating employment protection laws. "Victoria, perhaps we should focus on the quarterly financial reports rather than personnel matters," Dr. Williams suggested diplomatically, attempting to redirect the conversation away from public employee abuse that was being witnessed by multiple board members across international locations. But Victoria interpreted the suggestion as criticism that needed to be countered through increased demonstration of her authority over subordinates who served as convenient targets for her stress and frustration about business challenges beyond her control. "Patricia, effective leadership requires maintaining high standards for all employees, including administrative support staff who represent this corporation in their daily interactions," Victoria replied, while gesturing dismissively toward Sarah. "If we accept mediocrity from support personnel, that attitude spreads throughout the organization and undermines excellence at every level." The response attempted to frame her abuse as professional leadership, while ignoring the obvious inappropriateness of public humiliation and the growing discomfort of board members who were witnessing behavior that contradicted corporate values and ethical standards. As Victoria's business discussions continued, her treatment of Sarah became increasingly explicit and designed to demonstrate absolute power over someone who was completely dependent on her for employment and financial survival. "Sarah, I want you to stand in the corner of this room during our board meeting so you can observe how real professionals conduct business," Victoria commanded, while positioning Sarah where board members could witness her humiliation. "Maybe you'll learn something about competence and strategic thinking by watching people who actually understand global business operations." The demand was designed to degrade Sarah, while entertaining Victoria's business associates, who were supposed to appreciate demonstrations of dominance over subordinate employees, though several board members were becoming increasingly concerned about the legal and ethical implications of such treatment. Sarah complied with Victoria's degrading instruction, while her recording devices captured every aspect of the humiliation and the board members' reactions to witnessing systematic employee abuse during what was supposed to be a professional business meeting. Dr. Williams privately messaged other board members, expressing concern about Victoria's behavior and its potential impact on corporate liability, employee relations, and the company's reputation among stakeholders who expected ethical leadership and professional conduct from executive management. This is completely inappropriate behavior that creates enormous legal risks, Dr. Williams wrote in her encrypted message to fellow board members. We need to address this situation immediately, before it creates worse problems for our corporation and shareholders. But Victoria was too focused on demonstrating her power over Sarah to notice the growing concern among board members who were documenting her behavior for potential legal and administrative action that could affect her position as CEO and her control over the global corporation. As the board meeting progressed, Victoria's abuse of Sarah escalated to levels that shocked even business associates who had witnessed her difficult personality during previous corporate meetings and strategic planning sessions. Sarah, I want you to apologize to our board members for your poor performance and unprofessional attitude that has been disrupting our business operations, Victoria commanded, while forcing Sarah to address the international business audience that was witnessing her systematic humiliation. The demand for false apology was designed to force Sarah into accepting blame for imaginary failures while publicly degrading her in front of powerful business leaders who controlled global markets and investment decisions worth billions of dollars. Sarah recognized that Victoria's escalating demands had reached levels that constituted criminal harassment and created opportunities to expose the CEO's behavior to business associates and potential legal authorities who had the power to impose consequences for such systematic abuse. Ms. Blackwell, I cannot apologize for performance issues that don't exist, Sarah replied calmly, while her recording devices captured Victoria's shocked reaction to resistance from someone she had assumed would accept unlimited abuse without challenge or consequences. The response was Sarah's first direct challenge to Victoria's authority, revealing that the personal assistant possessed confidence and professional knowledge that contradicted the CEO's assumptions about her capabilities and willingness to accept degrading treatment without resistance. Victoria's reaction to Sarah's refusal demonstrated the depth of her narcissistic rage and her complete inability to handle challenges to her assumed authority over subordinates who were supposed to submit to any demand, regardless of appropriateness or legality. What did you just say to me? Victoria demanded with obvious fury at being challenged by someone she considered intellectually and socially inferior. Do you understand what I can do to destroy your pathetic little career and ensure that you never work in any professional capacity again? The explicit threat was witnessed by international board members who recognized that Victoria's behavior had escalated to levels that created serious legal liability, while demonstrating exactly the kind of leadership problems that justified immediate intervention and potential removal from executive positions. At that moment, Sarah made the decision that her research had collected sufficient evidence of Victoria's abusive behavior and that protecting other employees required immediate revelation of her true identity and qualifications that would expose the CEO's ignorance while providing credible documentation of systematic workplace harassment. Ms. Blackwell, my name is Sarah Martinez, and I hold degrees from MIT and Wharton Business School, specializing in organizational behavior and corporate ethics, Sarah announced calmly while removing her hidden recording equipment. I've been documenting your abusive behavior for the past 8 months as part of doctoral research about toxic leadership and its impact on employee welfare. The revelation created immediate shock among board members who realized that Victoria had been systematically abusing someone with advanced education and professional credentials, while demonstrating exactly the kind of poor judgment and character problems that made her unsuitable for executive leadership of a global corporation. The silence that followed Sarah's disclosure was deafening, as Victoria processed the implications of her behavior being documented by someone whose academic credentials and research expertise would give enormous credibility to any accusations of workplace harassment and corporate misconduct. Additionally, Sarah continued while Victoria struggled to comprehend the magnitude of her mistake, every interaction we've had has been recorded as evidence of systematic workplace abuse, and this board meeting has been documented for research about corporate governance failures and executive accountability. The revelation about comprehensive documentation created additional panic, as Victoria and board members understood that their conversation and her abusive behavior had been preserved as evidence that could destroy her career while exposing the corporation to enormous legal liability and reputational damage. Within hours of Sarah's revelation during Victoria's board meeting, the recorded footage of systematic workplace abuse began spreading across social media platforms and business networks with unprecedented velocity, as employees throughout Blackwell Global Enterprises shared their own stories about toxic corporate culture and executive harassment that had been concealed from public scrutiny. The hashtag #SujoBlackwell abuse began trending internationally within 6 hours of the initial leak, as current and former employees used Sarah's documentation to validate their own experiences with harassment, intimidation, and hostile working environments that had been enabled by corporate policies that prioritized executive comfort over employee welfare and basic human dignity. The high-definition recordings captured every detail of Victoria's escalating abuse, from her initial derogatory comments about employee intelligence to her explicit threats of career destruction, her demands for degrading performance, and her shocked reaction when Sarah revealed her true qualifications and research credentials that exposed Victoria's assumptions as completely wrong. The footage also captured the board meeting, where international business leaders witnessed Victoria's systematic abuse while demonstrating their own complicity through failure to intervene effectively or protect employees from harassment that violated corporate policies and employment protection laws. Business media coverage focused immediately on the implications for Blackwell Global Enterprises' corporate governance and executive accountability, as Victoria's documented behavior contradicted the company's public statements about workplace culture while revealing systematic leadership failures that created enormous legal and reputational risks. Blackwell CEO exposed abusing MIT graduate, disguised as assistant, became headline news across major financial and business platforms, with the security footage providing undeniable evidence of workplace harassment that demonstrated the toxic culture throughout one of America's largest corporations. The video evidence showed Victoria's systematic dehumanization of Sarah, her attempts to force degrading behavior during international business meetings, her explicit threats of retaliation, and her complete ignorance about the qualifications of someone whose education and expertise exceeded her own achievements, despite her wealth and corporate position. Corporate governance experts immediately recognized that Victoria's behavior created enormous liability for Blackwell Global Enterprises, while demonstrating exactly the kind of leadership failures that justified immediate removal from executive positions and comprehensive reforms in corporate culture and accountability systems. The international business community responded swiftly to Victoria's documented behavior, with major corporate partners, government contractors, and institutional investors withdrawing from business relationships worth tens of billions of dollars due to concerns about association with systematic workplace harassment and toxic leadership culture. The European Union announced investigations into Blackwell Global Enterprises' employment practices and corporate culture, recognizing that Victoria's documented behavior might indicate violations of international labor standards and human rights protections that governed multinational business operations. Asian business partners, including major Japanese, South Korean, and Chinese corporations, cancelled joint ventures and strategic partnerships worth hundreds of billions of dollars, citing concerns about reputational damage from association with documented workplace abuse and corporate harassment policies. Federal investigators and congressional committees immediately opened examinations of Blackwell Global Enterprises' corporate culture and employment practices, using Sarah's documentation as evidence of systematic violations that might require regulatory intervention and criminal prosecution of executive leadership. The Department of Justice announced investigations into potential violations of federal employment protection laws, with Sarah's evidence providing clear documentation of harassment, intimidation, and hostile working environment creation that violated multiple criminal statutes designed to protect employees from executive abuse. Securities and Exchange Commission investigators began examining whether Victoria's behavior and toxic corporate culture constituted material information that should have been disclosed to shareholders and investors who deserved accurate information about leadership risks when making investment decisions. Congressional hearings about corporate accountability and executive behavior were scheduled immediately, with Sarah's documentation providing evidence of systematic problems that required legislative oversight and potential regulatory reforms to protect employees from wealthy executives who abused their authority. Employment law attorneys recognized that Sarah's recordings provided unprecedented evidence of workplace harassment and corporate culture violations that would result in massive jury awards and punitive damages designed to deter similar misconduct throughout American business environments. The civil litigation against both Victoria personally and Blackwell Global Enterprises proceeded rapidly, with class action lawsuits representing thousands of employees who had experienced similar harassment while seeking damages for systematic violations of employment protection laws and civil rights statutes. Victoria's personal wealth faced immediate threats as her ownership stake in Blackwell Global Enterprises became worthless, and her other investments faced scrutiny from partners and financial institutions that were concerned about continued association with documented workplace harassment and criminal behavior. Her luxury real estate portfolio, art collections, and investment accounts faced potential seizure as evidence in criminal investigations, while civil litigation threatened to eliminate her remaining assets through punitive damages and legal settlements with affected employees and business partners. Stock prices for Blackwell Global Enterprises collapsed by 78% in the first week following the viral footage, as institutional investors recognized that Victoria's behavior created catastrophic reputational damage that would affect business relationships, regulatory compliance, and competitive positioning across global markets. Major pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and institutional investment managers announced the immediate divestiture of all Blackwell Global Enterprises holdings while implementing enhanced due diligence procedures that included executive character assessment and workplace culture evaluation for all investment decisions. Corporate customers representing over $200 billion in annual revenue canceled contracts and terminated business relationships with Blackwell Global Enterprises, citing policies that prohibited association with companies that tolerated systematic workplace harassment and employee abuse. The technology industry distanced itself from Victoria's business practices and leadership philosophy, with major corporations and professional organizations implementing enhanced ethical standards that explicitly prohibited the kind of employee abuse that Sarah's research had documented. As media coverage of Victoria Blackwell's systematic workplace abuse intensified, global attention shifted to Sarah Martinez's groundbreaking research about toxic leadership and corporate culture, creating unprecedented awareness about the psychological mechanisms that enabled executive harassment while inspiring policy reforms and academic initiatives worldwide. Sarah's doctoral dissertation research, which had motivated her decision to work undercover as Victoria's personal assistant, despite her MIT and Wharton credentials, became the subject of international conferences, business school curricula, and corporate governance reform initiatives that sought to address the systematic employee abuse that her work had documented. The research methodology that Sarah had employed, working as an executive assistant while maintaining advanced degrees to study toxic leadership from inside corporate power structures, was recognized as innovative social science that provided unique insights into workplace harassment and the psychological conditions that enabled systematic employee abuse. Her findings about narcissistic leadership patterns, the psychological mechanisms that enable dehumanization of employees, and the corporate culture conditions that allowed systematic abuse to persist were published in prestigious academic journals and became required reading in business schools, psychology programs, and organizational behavior curricula worldwide. The data that Sarah had collected during her 8 months working for Victoria revealed disturbing patterns of behavior that extended far beyond individual personality disorders to include systematic organizational dysfunction that affected thousands of employees, while creating enormous legal liability and reputational risks for corporations. Toxic leaders systematically dehumanize employees while using psychological manipulation to maintain control through fear and dependency. Sarah explained during congressional testimony about workplace harassment and corporate accountability. They create organizational cultures where abuse is normalized and employees are trained to accept degrading treatment as the price of employment and financial security. Her research had documented not only Victoria's individual behavior, but also the broader corporate systems that enabled such abuse, including board oversight failures, human resources policies that protected executives rather than employees, and institutional cultures that prioritized profit over basic human dignity. The statistical analysis showed that companies led by narcissistic executives experienced significantly higher rates of employee turnover, workplace harassment complaints, legal liability, and long-term financial underperformance, despite short-term profit maximization that enriched executives at the expense of organizational sustainability. Sarah's work also revealed that toxic leadership created cascading effects throughout organizational hierarchies, with middle managers and supervisors adopting similar abusive behaviors to protect themselves while perpetuating cycles of harassment that affected entire corporate cultures and employee populations. The institutional response to her research included comprehensive policy reforms at major corporations, enhanced board oversight requirements for executive behavior, and strengthened employment protection laws that held both individual executives and corporate entities accountable for workplace harassment and abuse. Harvard Business School, MIT Sloan School of Management, and Wharton Business School incorporated Sarah's research into mandatory curricula about ethical leadership and corporate responsibility, ensuring that future business leaders understood the legal, ethical, and financial consequences of toxic management practices. The research findings influenced regulatory policy at the Securities and Exchange Commission, Department of Labor, and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, leading to enhanced oversight requirements and enforcement mechanisms that protected employees from systematic workplace abuse. International organizations including the United Nations, International Labour Organization, and World Economic Forum adopted elements of Sarah's framework for understanding and preventing toxic leadership in multinational corporate environments. The methodology that Sarah had pioneered influenced similar research by other academics and investigators who recognized the need for systematic documentation of workplace harassment and toxic corporate cultures that typically remained hidden from public scrutiny and regulatory oversight. The criminal prosecution of Victoria Blackwell proceeded with unprecedented speed due to the overwhelming evidence provided by Sarah's comprehensive documentation, resulting in federal charges that included workplace harassment, conspiracy to violate civil rights, securities fraud, and obstruction of justice that carried potential prison sentences totaling over 20 years. Federal prosecutor Jennifer Rodriguez recognized that Victoria's case represented an opportunity to establish crucial precedents for holding wealthy executives accountable for systematic workplace abuse, while demonstrating that corporate position and financial resources would not protect individuals from consequences for criminal behavior against employees. This case represents everything that's wrong with corporate culture that enables and rewards systematic employee abuse, Prosecutor Rodriguez announced during the press conference outlining criminal charges. The defendant used her position as CEO to create and maintain a hostile working environment that violated the basic human rights and dignity of thousands of employees while enriching herself through their exploitation and suffering. The criminal charges were supported by testimony from hundreds of Blackwell Global Enterprises employees who had experienced similar harassment, creating a comprehensive case that demonstrated systematic patterns of abuse rather than isolated incidents or personality conflicts that could be explained away through legal technicalities. Victoria's defense team, led by prominent white-collar attorney Michael Stevens, attempted to argue that her behavior constituted demanding leadership rather than criminal harassment, but Sarah's video evidence made such defenses impossible to sustain given the explicit nature of the abuse and its systematic documentation. The trial proceedings attracted international media attention as Sarah's case highlighted broader issues about corporate accountability, employee protection, and the responsibility of wealthy executives to maintain ethical standards regardless of their financial power or perceived business importance. Sarah's testimony was particularly devastating, as she provided detailed analysis of Victoria's psychological manipulation techniques, while explaining how systematic workplace abuse created trauma that extended far beyond individual victims to affect entire organizational cultures and employee populations. The prosecution called expert witnesses on organizational psychology and workplace trauma who explained how Victoria's behavior represented textbook examples of narcissistic abuse while creating hostile working environments that violated multiple federal statutes designed to protect employee welfare and dignity. Dr. Patricia Williams, the former board member who had witnessed Victoria's abuse during the video conference, testified about the board's failure to intervene effectively while acknowledging their legal and ethical obligations to protect employees from executive harassment and misconduct. The jury deliberation lasted only 90 minutes before returning guilty verdicts on all criminal charges, with jurors explaining that Sarah's evidence provided overwhelming proof of systematic workplace abuse that demanded maximum criminal penalties and civil accountability. Victoria's sentencing included 8 years in federal prison, 10 years of probation, massive financial penalties, and permanent prohibition from executive positions or board service that prevented her from resuming abusive leadership practices in any corporate capacity. The civil litigation resulted in the largest employment harassment settlement in American legal history, with Victoria and Blackwell Global Enterprises paying over $15 billion in damages to affected employees while funding comprehensive workplace reform programs and employee protection initiatives. The settlement also required complete restructuring of Blackwell Global Enterprises' corporate governance, with independent oversight, enhanced employee protection policies, and mandatory ethics training that transformed the company's culture while serving as a model for corporate accountability throughout American business. 5 years after Sarah Martinez exposed Victoria Blackwell's systematic workplace abuse, the case had created lasting changes in corporate governance, employee protection, and executive accountability that influenced business practices throughout the United States and internationally, while inspiring comprehensive reforms in workplace culture. The Sarah Martinez Corporate Ethics Research Institute was established with funding from the civil settlement, providing resources for ongoing research about toxic leadership while developing training programs, policy frameworks, and intervention strategies that protected employees from systematic workplace abuse and harassment. Major corporations throughout the United States implemented comprehensive reforms based on Sarah's research findings, including enhanced oversight of executive behavior, strengthened employee protection policies, and accountability mechanisms that held leaders responsible for creating respectful workplace cultures rather than tolerating or enabling abusive management practices. Business schools worldwide incorporated Sarah's research into mandatory curricula about ethical leadership and corporate responsibility, ensuring that future executives understood their legal and moral obligations to maintain workplace dignity while recognizing the financial and reputational consequences of toxic management practices. The technology industry adopted enhanced artificial intelligence systems for detecting and preventing workplace harassment, using Sarah's research to develop monitoring and intervention tools that could identify patterns of abusive behavior before they escalated to levels that harmed employees or created legal liability. International organizations, including the United Nations, Global Compact, and International Labor Organization, established new standards for multinational corporate behavior, incorporating elements of Sarah's framework for understanding and preventing toxic leadership in global business environments. Sarah's academic career flourished as she accepted the position of Professor of Organizational Ethics at Harvard Business School, where she continued her research while training future business leaders about their responsibilities to create and maintain ethical workplace cultures that prioritized employee welfare alongside business performance. Her memoir, Undercover Executive: How Research Exposed Corporate Abuse and Transformed Business Culture, became an international bestseller while inspiring employees worldwide to document and report workplace harassment without fear of retaliation or career consequences. Victoria Blackwell's rehabilitation during incarceration included comprehensive therapy for narcissistic personality disorder and mandatory education about workplace psychology, employee rights, and the human consequences of executive abuse that had characterized her leadership throughout her business career. Her transformation from abusive executive to workplace harassment advocate demonstrated the possibility for character change and positive contribution following accountability for harmful behavior, though her case remained a cautionary example about the dangers of unchecked power and wealth. The Victoria Blackwell Employee Protection Foundation was established with her remaining assets and ongoing contributions from her post-prison work as a counsellor for corporate abuse survivors, providing resources for employees who had experienced workplace harassment while funding research and policy initiatives. The Foundation's programs included legal support for harassment victims, counseling services for workplace trauma recovery, and advocacy for enhanced employment protection laws that strengthened accountability for executives who abused their authority over vulnerable employees. 10 years after the viral exposure that destroyed Victoria Blackwell's empire and transformed Sarah Martinez into a leading authority on workplace ethics, their encounter continued to influence corporate culture, employment law, and business education throughout the world, while creating lasting protections for vulnerable employees. The Blackwell-Martinez Corporate Accountability Act, enacted by Congress with bipartisan support, established federal standards for executive behavior and workplace culture that held both individual leaders and corporate entities responsible for creating and maintaining respectful working environments, free from harassment and abuse. The legislation included enhanced penalties for workplace harassment, mandatory reporting requirements for corporate cultures that enabled abuse, and whistleblower protections that encouraged employees to document and report misconduct without fear of retaliation or career destruction. International business organizations adopted similar standards for multinational corporate behavior, recognizing that Sarah's research had provided frameworks for understanding and preventing toxic leadership that could be applied across different cultural and legal environments worldwide. The European Union implemented comprehensive corporate governance reforms based on Sarah's findings, requiring enhanced oversight of executive behavior and mandatory workplace culture assessments for all companies operating in member nations. Asian business communities incorporated elements of Sarah's research into traditional management philosophies, creating hybrid approaches that balanced hierarchical structures with employee protection and dignity requirements that prevented systematic workplace abuse. Business schools throughout the world established mandatory courses in workplace ethics and employee protection, using Sarah's documentation and Victoria's case as foundational examples of toxic leadership while teaching future executives about their legal and moral responsibilities. The technology industry developed sophisticated artificial intelligence systems for monitoring workplace interactions and identifying patterns of harassment or abuse before they escalated to levels that harmed employees or created legal liability for organizations. Healthcare systems implemented Sarah's research findings in policies for managing difficult patients and protecting medical staff from abuse, recognizing that workplace harassment occurred across all industries and required systematic prevention and intervention strategies. The legal profession adopted Sarah's research methodologies for investigating corporate misconduct, using undercover documentation and systematic analysis to expose workplace abuse while building cases for criminal prosecution and civil liability. Sarah's continued research and advocacy influenced national and international policy discussions about income inequality, corporate power concentration, and the need for enhanced accountability mechanisms that prevented wealthy individuals from abusing their authority over vulnerable employees. Victoria's ongoing rehabilitation work and advocacy for employee protection demonstrated the possibility for authentic character transformation following accountability for harmful behavior, though her case served as a permanent reminder about the dangers of unchecked corporate power. 15 years after their initial encounter in the Manhattan Memorial Hospital penthouse, the collaboration between Sarah Martinez and the reformed Victoria Blackwell had created a comprehensive framework for understanding, preventing, and addressing toxic leadership that influenced corporate governance and employee protection worldwide. The Martinez-Blackwell Institute for Ethical Leadership became a leading research and policy organization that developed standards for corporate behavior while training executives about their responsibilities to create and maintain workplace cultures that prioritized employee dignity alongside business performance. Their joint research publications influenced academic curricula, regulatory policies and corporate governance standards throughout the world, providing frameworks for understanding the psychological and organizational conditions that enabled workplace abuse while offering practical solutions for prevention and intervention. The annual Martinez-Blackwell Award for Corporate Ethics recognized business leaders who demonstrated exceptional commitment to employee welfare and workplace dignity, creating incentives for ethical leadership while celebrating organizations that prioritized human values alongside financial performance. International organizations including the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and United Nations adopted elements of their research framework for evaluating development projects and investment policies, ensuring that business practices supported human welfare rather than enabling exploitation and abuse. The comprehensive policy changes that resulted from their work included enhanced legal protections for employees, strengthened accountability mechanisms for executives, and improved oversight systems that prevented toxic leadership while promoting ethical business practices across all industries. Most importantly, their story demonstrated that individual courage and systematic research could challenge entrenched power structures while creating positive change that protected vulnerable workers and promoted human dignity in corporate environments worldwide. Sarah Martinez had proven that one person's commitment to justice and truth-telling could expose systematic abuse while inspiring comprehensive reforms that benefited millions of employees who deserved respectful treatment regardless of their position in organizational hierarchies. Victoria Blackwell's transformation from abusive executive to workplace advocacy demonstrated that accountability and education could create character change and positive contribution, though her case remained a permanent reminder about the importance of preventing toxic leadership before it caused irreparable harm. The high-definition exposure of Victoria's behavior had demonstrated that private executive misconduct could no longer remain hidden in an age of digital documentation and social media transparency that held powerful individuals accountable for their treatment of vulnerable employees. Their legacy continued to inspire employees, researchers, and advocates worldwide who understood that protecting workplace dignity required both individual courage and systematic reform that addressed power imbalances while ensuring that all workers received the respect and protection they deserved as human beings. The lasting transformation included not just legal protections and policy changes, but also cultural shifts that recognized employee dignity as a fundamental business value rather than an obstacle to profit maximization, creating environments where human welfare and financial success could coexist and mutually reinforce each other. The viral footage that captured Victoria Blackwell's systematic abuse of Sarah Martinez became more than just a moment of individual accountability. It evolved into a catalyst for global transformation in how businesses operated, how employees were treated, and how society balanced corporate power with human dignity and worker protection. Sarah's groundbreaking research had exposed the psychological and organizational mechanisms that enabled toxic leadership while providing practical frameworks for creating ethical workplace cultures that protected vulnerable employees from systematic abuse and harassment. Victoria's dramatic fall and subsequent rehabilitation demonstrated both the consequences of unchecked corporate power and the possibility for redemption through accountability, education, and genuine commitment to repairing the harm caused by abusive leadership practices. The comprehensive legal, policy, and cultural changes that resulted from their encounter created lasting protections for employees worldwide while establishing clear expectations for executive behavior that prioritized human dignity alongside business performance and financial success. Most significantly, their story reinforced the fundamental truth that every human being deserved respect and dignity regardless of their position in organizational hierarchies, and that wealth and power created responsibilities rather than privileges to exploit or abuse other people. The hospital penthouse where their confrontation occurred had been transformed into the Martinez Center for Workplace Ethics, providing training and research facilities for ongoing efforts to prevent toxic leadership, while supporting employees who experienced harassment or abuse in corporate environments. Their legacy served as a permanent reminder that individual courage could challenge systematic injustice while creating positive change that benefited entire communities of workers who deserved protection from abusive executives and toxic organizational cultures. The revolution they had sparked continued to influence business practices, academic research, and policy development worldwide, ensuring that future generations of employees would inherit workplace cultures that valued human dignity as much as financial performance and competitive success. If this story touched you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments what part resonated most with you. Until next time.